Welcome back to another episode, and I am delighted to have a good friend and colleague on the episode today, Susan Bradley. And Susan has been doing what she's doing for a long time. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we first met at the Nasrudin Project. Would that be?
Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And you were one of the originals, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked a lot about the Nasrudin Project on the podcast. And we are celebrating our 30th year in the Black Hills of South Dakota, September 5th at the State Game Lodge. So that was the commercial for the episode.
Good. It'll be wonderful as always.
So Susan, we were talking just before we started that I'm not sure that the average listener to this podcast is aware of your work. And I think that would be a good place to start, is just introducing them to what's your heart, soul, and passion in the world.
In the world. Rick, I guess I am fortunate that I can answer that question. To say what my heart, soul, and passion is, it's an easy thing for me to say. I don't know I don't know exactly how I found it, but I feel like I got tapped to do my work, which is also a good feeling. So the work is to help ease and amplify the good side of life-changing events. And I'll give you a quick on how it started, because the term transition, we are financial transitionists, which means we're skilled and trained to manage change. And when this started back in 1995, I didn't have a clue about transitions. I was a financial planner. I was confronted with a pretty rough situation for women receiving settlements for medical complications. And when I was introduced to them, not personally to the lawyers involved, they were all future spending for this event that was coming. The event did not happen. I was writing a white paper for them, and I was afraid they were going to go into bankruptcy if it didn't happen, and it in fact didn't happen. And the lawyer's response was, "Don't worry about it, we handle bankruptcy." And that was actually the pivot in my life. It just wasn't okay. And he said, it's not his job. So I started to research it. And that stuff goes on today.
Yes.
I still now and then work in that field because it's just kind of a messy space at best. But anyway, so I ended up writing the Sudden Money book mainly because I wanted to read it. I wanted someone to teach me, so I was figuring it out. And the best I could have told anybody then is that we were creating a change model for financial planning. So it was change management in the context of financial planning. And then I got introduced to Bill Bridges' work, which was transitions. And I realized, change is one thing. Transition is what happens as a result. Change is situational. Transition is the adaptation. Okay. And then when you looked at it, I realized that the people we work with as financial planners take about 5+ years to really change and to adapt and to adjust and transform. And that's the unseen part. It's a big deal. And now what I'm seeing is the world, obviously from pandemic, the word transition came up a lot. I always tell that you think this is a one-liner joke, but it actually is true. I was talking to a company who wanted to know about women in finance. They wanted me to do a women's program, and I said, I think you should do it on women in transition. Told them all these things, and they said, we're just not going to deal with menopause. And that's what they thought of women in transition.
Oh, no.
So that's how far off the mark we were as a profession. But pandemic has changed that. And now I think there's so much disruption and uncertainty and velocity of change that we're in yet a new iteration of the work that I do. So sorry for the long history lesson there, but I guess I would say I'm here to help the world change a bit, one individual at a time, as best I can.
You said a couple things that I resonate with, and the first is that I wrote the book because I wanted to read it. and also, Susan, if I could ask anybody the question of what's your role, what's your purpose in the world, you would be the person that could answer that, because you're not unaccustomed to diving deep within yourself and doing the work yourself. And our good friend Gail Coleman has, heck, I first heard her say this 20 years ago, that you can only take a client as far as you're taking yourself.
Right.
And so in that regard, I think you're the poster child for what you've done, because whatever you suggest clients do, advisors do, coaches do that you're that are in your program, you've done, and that's
true.
Huge. That is just huge. So, so getting clear through writing, I get that, because when I sit down to write a weekly column, I'm writing and I go, gee, I didn't know I believed that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, wow. So I really get that, because I don't know if this is the same for you, but I write to be understood. To be understood, I have to write in a manner that's understandable. And breaking things down and putting it together, and also adding some type 1 logic to it. Sometimes I come up into a line of thinking I didn't realize was, oh, this is what that's about. So I resonated with that. Another thing you said that I really resonate with, I think you said it takes about 5 years to go through a transition.
Yeah.
And that would be starting with the anticipation of the transition to what you would term the new normal.
Well, actually, the 5-year that we work with is the 3rd stage.
Passage.
So if you go from, there are 4 stages: the anticipation of an event,
okay,
the event itself, the no going back, the mile marker in life, before and after event, and all the pieces have to get put back together. Then there is the adjustment. Bill Bridges called it the new normal. I don't think it's a new, or was it the new normal? He had a different phrase for it. Bruce Feiler calls it the messy middle. There's all different terms for this when it feels like it should be done, but it's not. And there's literally a full body, full relationship adaptation to the change, if it was a big change. And that's the part, Rick, that I think takes 5+. And that's when people think they should be done, but they're not.
Now that makes even more sense, because as I was thinking about that, well, anticipation could last a long time, right? Or a very short time.
Yes, or none. Pandemic,
right.
We had none. Just bam, done. Yeah, well, we had a little bit, but we were all ignoring it. We weren't, what we say when there's an event coming, to be present for it even before it happens. Doesn't mean you're obsessed with it, just but lean into it. Prepare yourself to be your best decision maker, kind of do what you can. With pandemic, it felt like, to me, it was March 16 when I finally got it, and nobody came back to the office, and we've been virtual ever since. So sometimes if an accident changes everything, a lottery win changes everything, a notice that something with a stock option or something with the death of a person. So you don't always have anticipation stage. It's a really great thing to be aware of it and to be in it, lean into it, but we don't always get it.
That makes a ton of sense. So 5 years in passage, normally, which I was thinking of that just recently, and with financial decisions, time is money. That's a broad statement, and my point to that is, if I don't know. I'm thinking of being in like pre-contemplation with the stages of change.
Yep.
And let's say it's overspending and I don't even know it. And there's something happens, a small intervention where I become ready to contemplate making that change. I don't know, maybe the event might be, OMG, look at my credit card statement. This is out of control. We know, at least it's my thoughts, that only about 20% of people in that moment need new information. Like, well, here's how money works. If you spend more than it comes in, you have to borrow, and eventually you're going to hit some type of debt limit and things won't go well. So just simply quit spending as much.
Easy peasy.
Chop your budget and live within your means. And there's no research on this, but 20% of people would go, wow, I never knew that. I never understood that. Okay, chop, problem solved. And you laughed when I said that, because we know 80%, it could be more, of folks already have that knowledge.
Yeah.
And they can't stop for whatever reason, or every month there's this one-time event that blows the budget. And so it's really chronic. So getting to what is driving being stuck financially, whether it's stuck overspending or stuck with an estate planning issue, is going to require some introspection, some guidance in that way. And I have long said, wow, this financial therapy stuff takes a long time. and in what we do, we have a metric for success, and that may be a little bit crass, but I remember a psychologist that I worked with said that was one of the differences in working with somebody therapeutically around money issues, is that the metric is the money. That, well, if we're working on overspending, ultimately the success is not overspending anymore. And getting from point A to point Z can take a lot of time.
True.
So I think that's a way that I could apply the passage of that transition of coming to a new normal that would be a new normal with some healthy financial habits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've challenged myself to see many things that don't line up on a list of life events that change everything. There's a whole bunch of research, and you can get 50 events or 30 events or whatever, but there are some that are real disruptors that financial planners and financial therapists might work with. What you're talking about is a conscious change in the way life works. Probably routines, probably commitments, responsibilities, even some self-identity in all of that, right? So it's, if you say an event, if you want to identify the time that someone gets it, that there's a problem and I'm ready. I think Petraska's work says that only 20% of people are really ready to make the change and to
Right.
implement. So there's process there. So if that were the event, and then you had to, the ending, the doing part of it would be maybe cutting off some monthly expenses, change your routine and where you go and how you do life each month. So you're adjusting like that, and you can get the numbers to work. But then that passage stage is really living with that. It wasn't just 2 months where you had it together. It's
Right.
something that becomes an embedded, repeatable process. And so your identity is shifting. Instead of maybe shopping for self-soothing, you find another way of self-soothing, and then that puts you into different maybe social situations, and then you're adjusting to that. So if you identify it as this thing and you make that an event, there is an anticipation, knowing that there's something that needs to be fixed. If the ending is the fixing, and then the passage is the adaptation to it, and maybe the transformation comes. So the new normal at the end, you would no longer identify as someone who is on a real conscious budget kind of thing. It's just who you are. It's just the way your life goes. So you're not thinking about the debt. You're more forward thinking than I'm still fixing. So yeah, you could pattern out anticipation, ending, passage, new normal. With that, I hadn't thought of that one. So thank you. That's a good exercise.
Well, that's interesting, in that the anticipation in the example that I just threw out can be the anticipation of balancing, getting the skills to live within your means.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to make the whole thing a lot longer,
It takes what it takes.
It takes 5 years in anticipation, right? To get to the ending. And I think in many cases, it would be the ending of the lifestyle that I had, right?
Yeah. There would be pieces of that. And I guess you might even map this out differently for different situations. Obviously, we're doing a big balcony kind of thing, but knowing that you have to make a lifestyle change in order to achieve this would be the anticipation part of it. And then the doing it, stopping the extra spending and the auto deposits or things like that, or contributions you make, whatever it is. So cleaning that up, and then living with that, not going to this place or that place, or the shopping, and maybe it's
Right.
changing what you're driving, or maybe it's changing how you vacation, and there's all kinds of creative ways to start to live a new life with that tighter budget. And if you're married or if you're partnered, the amplification happens, right?
That is a fascinating way to apply the transition model.
Yeah,
I have never thought of that either, because you're right. There's two phases to that. It's the lifestyle, living my life before, and now the real transition of what's it like now that I'm living this new lifestyle, now that I'm living within a budget. And that's the part that that the average would be about 5 years to be in that passage.
It's the adjustment. Yeah. Yeah. And I never really thought about this in terms of debt. So I'm just telling you that we've been looking at this for 23 years. And in the beginning for this passage thing, all I knew in the beginning was I would hear over and over again, this should be over. It's been a year, just get on with it. So obviously the first year, if you think about divorce and death of a spouse, that we all sort of get, there's a numb, tender time. It's the second year that throws people off because they think I've already done my first year, so how come? So there's a sense of failure and shame that can come up in that second year.
Yep.
So when and then once you get through that, then it's the reordering the way life goes, the routines, the people, what you're, how you see yourself. And you know that when you work with trauma, people get re-triggered, right? And that can happen really for a lifetime, depending upon the situations. So does the fact that you get re-triggered 6 years later, does that mean you're still in passage? I don't really know. I don't think about it that way, but I think about it more the way the flow of life has shifted and become something else. And triggers and glimmers and all of that happen, but it's you're probably out of that passage. Although I have spoken to many financial planners, and some people that you and I both know have made some pretty big changes in their lives. I remember Peggy Fry. She tells the story about leaving Citibank. She was a private banker in New York City, and she lived that whole kind of big life. And she decided that she needed a change, and she wanted a farm. And she was raising dogs on the side with her banking job. She was also playing adult hockey. So, I mean, she had this very interesting life. And she moved from New York to Virginia and bought a farm with her husband. And at that time, Citibank had the nosedive in 2008. So the finances, the way it was supposed to work, wasn't going to work for that period of time. And I met her at a Nasrudin, and she was telling me the story, and I said, whoa, Peggy, that's a heck of a transition. And she said, never thought of it that way. And Peggy is one of our lead trainers now, and Peggy will say, years after that, she would say, it's still not done. So she's really aware of it. So when I say 5 or 6 years, she'll laugh and say, she says, yeah, try 8 or 10, that kind of thing. But our culture doesn't pay attention to the transit, to the movement to the next. We just want to expedite, get it done. And there's all this unseen, and I just think it's a shame because there's so much potential in those times when we're in transit. We're making minor and major choices, and we're looking to find a fit. What is our new fit? And trying to build through that and keep moving. But it's subtle. And if you're in a culture that says, what is wrong with you? Or you say in your head, what's wrong with me? It just makes it harder. It's still going to happen. It just makes it harder.
I'm thinking of the triggers, and you're wondering, well, are you through it or not? And I'm thinking, well, I mean, if you've been married for a couple, 2 or 3 decades, and your spouse dies, I have heard that it takes one as long to go through the grieving process as you were together. Now, I don't think that means being in transition that whole time, but I'm thinking that the triggers can become part of the new normal. where it just hits you.
Oh,
You're
yeah,
someplace, you smell a smell, hear a song, whatever it is, and boom, you're into that grief. That just could be part of having gone through the transition and transitioning to this is part of the new normal.
I think maybe part of it is what is the result of being triggered? I had a brother who was killed in a terrible accident in 1978. And sometimes when I hear something about seatbelts or teenage driving and all of that, it triggers me. And I feel that grief again. And if I'm with my other siblings, it's a little bit magnified. It comes and it goes. So that doesn't last. It doesn't shift my decisions and where my attention is in general in life. So I think it kind of depends. Um, I think it's more in the in widowhood is what they talk about, but certainly men feel it as well. It's being aware that that person is no longer there on an ongoing basis, when that you're still struggling with that. I remember one woman said her grandson wanted to take grandpa's car. It's a good car sitting in the garage, and she wasn't ready, and nobody could understand. And finally she said, I like seeing his hat on the passenger seat.
Mm,
She just wasn't ready to release.
right.
So it's we're human. It's so complicated. It's nonlinear. It's which is, I think that's what fascinates me. The idea of evolution and transition doesn't lend itself to equations very well. And as a financial planner, we're taught a linear process. And it's not that we don't have any training in it. We know about certain trusts that you do in this situation, and how you handle stock options and whatever. You got that. But the human part of it, I think one reason that the profession of financial planning has been so slow to embrace transitions, and I wouldn't say they're even embracing it now. I'm sure I'm still on the margin somewhat. But at the same time, it's hard to embrace something that you can't put into a container and build into a scalable, efficient practice, because the clients are not scalable and efficient. Individually. It just, it just is. And if we're not willing to do that, then it's better. I think the choice is either you pay attention and you do that work, which is pretty serious and wonderful work, or you just brush over. You just kind of do a drive-by.
Exactly. And I do have a hunch you're on the fringe. When I teach my graduate course at GGU, which is in the life planning track, so many of the students will say, I didn't know this existed. I thought I had everything needed to be a financial planner. And now I'm wondering if I really have the tools and skills to do it. Yeah, well, I remember when another friend of ours, Elizabeth Jeton, I was talking to her. She was president of the FBA at that time. And I was being amazed that not every financial planner thought this way. And she says, Rick, you've got to understand, very few planners are like us. And I don't mean that in a offensive manner to any financial planner listening to this already gets it. So I won't go down that
on the
path.
bus, off the bus, maybe. I don't know.
Susan, we're going to have to end this episode here. But I'm excited that we'll do another episode.
I look forward to it, Rick. It's always fun to hang out with you.
Come on back next week.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.